So, hello everyone. I'm Nick Leonard. I lead the data team at Meetup, and welcome to our first episode in our new success series. We'll be featuring experts that will provide guidance on work balance, financial stability, entrepreneurship, and more. To start us off, we have Amy Nelson, who will share experience as a working parent while leading a company. We'll discuss challenges that parents face striking a balance between obligations at home and at the office, even when home is the office. And we'll conclude with actions you can take to manage stress and be there for the people counting on you. All right, so before we get started, we're going to go over the guidelines and the agenda. So this event will be recorded, but don't worry, you will not appear on video and your audio will be muted. So we only hear the panelists. The chat for the event will be turned off, but if you have any questions, please submit them at the QA feature on the bottom of your screen. We also have closed captioning available. On the bottom of your screen, you will see live transcription icon, and you can select your preference. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Amy. So Amy Nelson is the founder of the Riveter, a community platform built by and for working women. A graduate from Emory University and the New York School of Law, Amy practiced corporate litigation with a focus on high-profile First Amendment matters for over a decade in New York City and Seattle. She also served on President Obama's National Finance Committee, where she co-chaired Gen 44, the under 40 fundraising arm of the campaign. Additionally, Amy previously worked with President Carter's The Carter Center. Amy is the mother of 4 daughters, aged 6 and under. She is a contributor for Inc. and the host of iHeartRadio's What's Her Story with Sam and Amy. In addition to raising $30 million in venture capital to grow the Riveter, Amy has been published broadly, including in and on outlets, including The Today Show, Refinery 29, BuzzFeed, The Washington Post, and the Seattle Times. She has spoken across the world on many stages, including Fortune's Most Powerful Women, Cannes Lions, and South by Southwest. She is currently working on an exciting new venture for Hudson's Bay Company. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks, Nick. It's so great to be here.
All right, so let's get on to question number 1. So Amy, tell us about yourself. You have 4 daughters, all under the age of 6. How do you do it? And what was it like when you had your first daughter and worked full time? Can you walk us through that time in your life?
I can, if I can remember it. I'll preface it by saying I'm sure my answer to how I do it now is wildly different than the answer I would have given 18 months ago before the pandemic started. I think that's like a global reality for parents everywhere. And it's been hard for everyone. But in thinking about going back to when I had my first daughter, it really is kind of like a bomb going off in your life, isn't it? And I know you're a new parent too.
Yes, I should say that too. So I'm a new parent to a daughter who is now 8 months old.
Amazing. When I had my first daughter, I was about 8 years into my legal practice. And as a litigator, it's client services. So your time is not your own. You kind of need to be there whenever your client needs something, which is a lot when you're a corporate litigator. And it's interesting, with my first daughter, I really felt like I didn't know all of these things I felt like someone should have told me.
Yeah.
A common experience in the workplace. But for me, what I really had to figure out when I had my first daughter, and I did take a parental leave, but in going back to work, I had to figure out how am I going to change the way I spend my time? Because when I was a lawyer without being a parent, it really was like all about being the very best lawyer. I didn't have to try to be the very best parent too. And so I think I spent more time socializing at work or maybe being a bit slower. But after I became a parent, for me, the big question was, how do I prioritize my time so that I can be there for my daughter and also be a really good lawyer? And so with that, it became this thing of like, for me, the way to make it work was getting up really early, doing a couple hours of work before the baby got up, and then spending some time with the baby and then going into work. It was a really, really hard juggle. It was a really, really hard transition. And I think we don't kind of acknowledge that enough for people. There should be a lot of support groups around it, I think, at work. But for us too, it's just putting the systems in place to make it work. We were on the wait list for a bunch of different daycares because I lived in Seattle at the time, which was growing massively, and there wasn't an infrastructure that had caught up to the reality of the city. One daycare, I was on a wait list for 3 years, and then I got a call and I was like, we found an alternative in the past 3 years. But it was finding a system that worked, and for us, we did a nanny share. So we shared a nanny with another family because we couldn't get into a daycare. And then eventually my mother, who was a retired teacher, was gracious enough to come out and help us. But really putting those systems in place to make it work, because it takes a lot of planning to be a working parent, which is something no one explained to me quite how much planning it would take. But it's just,
Yeah.
it was really hard. And dealing with like the sleep deprivation, people don't talk about that enough. It's a very real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Sleep deprivation, you can't say enough about it. You just got to learn how to function on a new normal of sleep.
I will say, and this is like my first pro tip of parenting, and it sounds very bougie, but it was beyond worth the money. With my first daughter, I didn't do any sleep training. And when she was 10 months old, she was like sleeping in bed with us all night. And my husband's like, I think we're going to get a divorce. Neither of us sleeping. And so I went online and I found a woman in Idaho named Shannon Glenn. Her company is Sleep Well. And she does on the phone sleep training. Like she teaches you to train your child to sleep. And it is not rocket science, but it's really helpful to have someone do it. And I think it was like $250. So we like set the money aside and did it. And it was the best money I have ever spent. Truly.
Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to sleep, like that's an investment that's really worth it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what you said at the beginning about time management has been a big thing for me as well. It started a little bit before we had a kid. You mentioned like the social aspect of work and kind of taking your time with things. Started being more specific about where I spent my time, like with work and outside of work. And then it just forces you to become more efficient. I think you mentioned this as well in a good way. I think that's beneficial for your work life as well. Being able to make the tough decisions, make a decision and kind of move on because there are many more things to do and
Yeah,
many more priorities to come. Yeah.
and one thing to note though, that like I think it's important to acknowledge that when you feel like you can't do the happy hours or the social stuff after work, you feel like you might be setting yourself back in terms of networking and really trying to rise up the ladder in your company because you're not taking the time to develop those personal relationships. And so I think it's important to try to find other time for that. You can have a coffee at 9 a.m. You can go to lunch, right? And then though that might take away from dedicated work time, if you have to hop back online after baby goes to bed, that's fine. But it's kind of shifting how you think about the networking and the social aspects of work too, so that you can still participate in them.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had to make some schedule shifts as well. That's helped getting into a little bit different routine. How about from your husband's perspective? What was it like for him the first time?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So my husband did not take any parental leave with our first two babies. He did with the second two, but not right when they were born. Well, he took a couple days when they were born, but then, later on when we could kind of flip taking care of the kids. I think for my husband, it was also like both of us were in our 30s when we had our first child. And I think it was really like we'd had these careers and these lives, and then it was like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is which is a real
What? Same thing. Going through a real time right now. Yeah.
But I think for my husband, I think on the one hand it was hard because I think he felt like he couldn't do a lot, and when they're really little, if a mother or anyone is breastfeeding, that piece of it's hard. And then we made ultimately the decision that there was no reason for both of us not to try to sleep. So at the very beginning, we slept in separate rooms so that he could sleep, so we both weren't sleep deprived jerks. But I think, for him, I think it was also a really big shift. And, my husband, we have gone back and being primary care of our kids. We have both always worked, but we have gone back and forth as to who's the primary caretaker. Right now he is. There are times where I have been. And so, and it's the interesting thing with my husband is people are always really surprised about how involved he is. Which is just, this is like a meta conversation about American culture. But like, it's very surprising when he's doing pick up and drop off, and all of those things. I remember once someone said, oh, it's like your husband's doing daddy daycare. And I'm like, there's no such thing as daddy daycare. That's just called being a dad. like being a
Yeah.
parent,
Yeah.
right? Like, because you would never say mommy daycare. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of points there on the parental leave front. Can you still hear me okay? I think I might be breaking up a little bit.
I hear you just
Um,
fine. Yep.
okay, great. Yeah, on the parental leave front, I was lucky enough to be employed at a company at the time that gave me 4 weeks off. So I couldn't wait to take all of that and spend as much time. And in the city, New York, where I was living at the time, there was pretty generous parental leave. So, and I was able to cobble together basically 2 months worth of leave, which was really special and really a big priority for me because the whole process of childbirth for the mother is just an extremely grueling process, and it was really incredible to see how my wife handled it. But there was no way that she could have done it alone, or I could have done it alone myself. So it was definitely a team effort there, and yeah, it required a lot of focus and a lot of focus that we wouldn't have been able to have if we were still working full time. So
And it is like, I think, and like to that point, like we are both very lucky, you and I, that we, have worked with and for companies that value parental leave. I mean, the majority of American women have to go back to work like in theory the day after they have a baby, and that is wild. I
that's
mean, it's like a
that's insane.
major,
Yeah.
and like I think the way about it is like what babies they have a C-section, but like even giving birth, it's like a major surgery. And like we would never expect someone
Yes.
to go back to work the
Yes.
day after they had like a major trauma surgery,
Yeah.
right? And it's just kind of insane to me that the country is still where it is in terms of parental leave. I think there are a lot of people advocating for change, and I think change is not fast enough. Um,
Yeah.
we need to make sure that parental leave is normal and standard for people who work hourly jobs as well.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
lot of progress.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of progress for sure. Um, all right. So another question here. What can new parents do to embrace the transformations and transitions to professional life that come from parenthood? What skills do you need to make the shift work?
So my first, big piece of advice here is that you shouldn't try to do this alone. Or if you're a single parent, or even if you're married, like the couple should not try to do it alone. It is too hard. Like it
Yeah.
is too hard
Yeah.
and too isolating. And it's something that it's a time in your life. I really think that community becomes so incredibly important. I was really lucky in Seattle. There's an organization called PEPS, which is providing early parent support, and they place you in a cohort in within your zip code of other parents who are having a baby within 6 weeks of you. And then you meet
Wow.
once a week starting when the baby is like 6 or 8 weeks old, and it's a 3-month program. And it really is just kind of like a social get together, but they have like someone come in to talk about like baby's health, or all of these different things. And that was really critical because I was constantly thinking like, am I doing something wrong? Am I feeding my baby correctly? Why isn't my baby sleeping? And just to
Yeah.
be around other people who are kind of like, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this, but like, what the fuck just happened? It's like really helpful, I think.
Yeah.
It's important to
That's a great
have,
way to describe it. Yeah.
it's just really important to have those groups around you. So I would seek those out. And if there's not an in-person group, certainly there are online groups that you can join and be a part of and talk to people about what's going on. And also your own as a new parent. For women who have had babies, you're going through a lot of physical trauma in the months after having a baby. And so like you have to take care of yourself. And for all parents who aren't sleeping, like, it's just really important to have that, and to have that community and people rooting for you to take care of yourself through this period of time as well. I would also say that it's really important to maintain an open line of communication with your workplace and with your manager in the time before you go out on leave. Or if you don't, I mean, I'm just going to hope everyone has leave. I know that's just a privileged thing to say, but before you have the baby, talking with your boss and your team about your plans, making concrete plans so that you're not kind of drawn back into work, 48 hours after you had a baby. Not that that's ever happened to any of us. And so I think things like that are super, super important. Researching your company's, in fact, leave policies, insurance. Like I remember I had babies when I was at a law firm. I had babies when I worked in-house for a big company, and then I had babies when I was running my startup. So I had all these different when I worked for a company, there were all these rules I had to follow about calling calling HR within 24 hours after I had a baby to trip the start of my leave, which that needs to be changed, but because you shouldn't have
Yeah.
to deal with that. But anyway,
No.
researching and making sure you have all these things set out, and then also researching the benefits that you might have as a child. A lot of companies offer tax-free dollars for childcare. Take those. It's found money, and even though it feels like money coming out of your paycheck today, take it because you can use it for childcare. So just making sure you get all of those things are really important. And then I think if it's at all possible, and I had jobs where this was possible and jobs where it wasn't possible, thinking about how you can ramp back into work after you've had your baby, instead of going from being on leave to going back to 50 or 60 hours a week. Can I work 50% for 2 weeks or hopefully a month, but like even a week, right? Like just so you're kind of getting used to that going back period, I think is super important. And then if you can, and I would really, I mean, we're all humans, so we should be able to do this, but talking with your manager about any flexibility that you might be able to have in terms of being in the office, even if your child is in daycare or you have full-time childcare, being able to work from home and not have the commute or any of that can be game changing, even if it's just a day a week, right? I remember when I was at my law firm, I actually went down to 80% after my first baby. Turned out that you can't really do that in client services. So I was working 100% and just took a pay cut to 80%. And to be fair, my law firm acknowledged that and gave me back pay after we had the conversation
Wow.
about it. But point was is that in the middle of my goal, and this sometimes worked, on Wednesdays I could work from home. It allowed me to spend a little bit more time with my baby, which really mattered to me. Just, just a little bit in the middle of the week, having a couple extra hours with her was game changing for my mental health. She probably would have been fine, but I needed it.
Yeah, it's important to listen to that aspect of yourself and spend as much time as you can and that you're comfortable with. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think talking to your manager is a great idea. It never hurts to ask, like lay it out, ask the question. I think and hopefully they can accommodate your flexibility.
Yeah, and one thing that I found to be true, not just in conversations about kids and your schedule, but kind of in all these conversations, which I was awfully nervous to talk to my manager about having kids, and about what that was going to be like, even though I had a
Yeah.
great boss at my law firm who had 2 daughters. And what I did is I wrote out a script, about the points I wanted to hit, how I felt. And I will say I was lucky beyond belief that the law firm I worked at, Dorsey and Whitney, had, when I had my first daughter, had 4 months of paid leave and 2 months of unpaid leave, which is not normal. And my husband and I budgeted so I could take the 2 extra months of unpaid leave. But I remember when I walked in to talk about leave with my boss, I said to him, I plan to take the 6 months. I didn't ask because the policy was I could have up to 6 months. So I said, this is what I'm doing. And I think sometimes just if that's your policy, take advantage of the policy, right? Like you deserve that time. Most other countries in the world give you that time.
Yeah. Yeah. You absolutely deserve that time for sure. Yeah. Take as much time as you can because you definitely deserve it. Yeah.
I agree.
That's really smart. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So fast forward to now, with 4 girls under the age of 6 and a bustling career. How do you balance it? And have you ever thought about giving up your career or?
Yeah, I have. I think most people would be surprised by the answer if they know about my career, but I definitely have thought about it. I mean, it's really, really hard. And almost 7 years in, I think I've figured out how to do it in a lot of ways, and that like I'm just going to be drinking from a fire hose. I mean, I am the one that chose to have 4 children in 4.5 years. I would say I don't have a balance, and that's the truth of the matter. I think what I do have is a way that I integrate work and life. My children know all about what I do. They hear me talk about it. They see me do it. They're a part of it. And I am not someone who is always on my phone 24 hours a day. Like when I'm with my kids, I can put it away. But I'm not someone who's like, okay, I'm done at 6. I'm not looking at my phone. Like that is just not how I am. So I kind of just weave everything together.
Yeah.
And I bring my daughters to work too. I mean, before the pandemic, so I had a baby in June of 2019. She's my last child. I am not having any more children. And I was really busy with the Riveter. We were really scaling, and I didn't really have the luxury of taking a lot of time off. I took 6 weeks off travel, and then I just took my baby everywhere. She went to 10 states, and I just I just took her to work for about 4
Awesome.
months, and it was
That's
wonderful,
awesome.
and I just wanted to. I didn't want to be away from her, and it was hard at times, but I have friends everywhere and people helped me, and she went on
Yeah.
red eyes with me. It was nuts. But I think I've just decided that I want to have this big career and I want to have this big family, and I'm just going to make my kids a part of it. I
Yeah.
also feel very obligated to talk to my kids about work a lot. And I think that is because I'm a woman. But, there, there's this huge perception, right, about like how we should feel and what we should do, and that I don't think my husband has, or that society puts on him. And so, I talk to my girls all the time about my job. Mommy loves her job. This is really hard, but mommy still likes it. This is why I'm doing this. I tell them, you know what? This probably sounds societally crazy. Like I tell my kids, I like to make money. Like I think it's important, right? Like mommy wants to make money,
Yeah.
and so I think like those messages, like they're hearing those messages from birth,
Yeah.
right? And I want to know how that impacts them. My mother always worked, but my mom was a teacher. I have a way harder job than I have, but my kids have me, running companies and seeing what that's like, and I want them to know that I embrace it and that they can do whatever they want to.
That's really awesome. I think I'm gonna take that talk to her about like what work means in life and like why it's a part of my life and why it's kind of necessary in some ways. Yeah, I think that's great advice. There was a couple things that you mentioned there that I want to expand upon a little bit. So not looking at your phone, that takes a lot of discipline. So kudos to you, and that's really awesome. Like coming back to the previous question, when we were planning the birth of our daughter, like and talking to my manager, like I wrote down as much stuff as I could before I was going away for a month or 2 months, because I didn't want to be bothered. I didn't want to look at my phone either. This kind of applies to my vacation rules too. Like when I'm away from work, like I want to be completely away.
Yeah,
So I appreciate that perspective, and I hear you on that one. It was important to give time to my wife and to my family at that time too, to be
yeah.
fully in the moment. Um, and my daughter was born during COVID, so we were in the hospital room for almost a week, like literally in the room. We did not leave the hospital.
Oh
So
my gosh, that's
um, yeah,
crazy.
I didn't want to be working at that point. Yeah, that was really, it went by fast. It was really special to just be able to have that one-on-one like bonding time. I think that focus with my daughter was really special.
That's
For
awesome.
my wife, obviously it was a different experience. Like I didn't have to go through the physical trauma. She was in a different world at that time, but um, she was really strong. I continue to be like impressed thinking about that experience for her. She's an awesome mom.
It's
Um,
pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing, especially to go through for the first time. It's
yeah,
wild.
yeah, it is really wild. Another thing you mentioned is bringing your children to work, your daughter to work. So how did you see that affecting the rest of your company and the women who worked at your company as well? How did they kind of perceive that, or were you thinking about that when you made that decision to bring your daughter to work and
I
make her
mean,
a part of it?
I think like I did it out of necessity, in a lot of ways. We were, I think this is true of a lot of people who start companies. I had literally no idea what I was signing up for. Like no clue, right? Like I
Yeah,
was like, oh well, when I had the idea for the Riveter, I at first thought it would be just like one space in Seattle would be a small business. And it was very much driven by the fact that I was having a really hard time being a lawyer in a rigid schedule and
hmm
wanted more
hmm
time with my kids.
yeah,
And then I decided to scale the company and raise millions of dollars, which is just, I mean, that's not a work-life balance type endeavor. And so it was really driven by this necessity of like, if I want to see my kids, and I was nursing two babies through it, and like, if I'm going to nurse my babies, like, I have to find a way to just do this. And it was interesting, like, before the pandemic, when the Riveter still had a lot of in real life spaces and we were scaling, I interviewed a lot of people like right after I nursed, or I was like, and like months later, people would say to me, like, you like had a baby when I came in to interview for this, 6 week really high. I'm really used to
yeah,
having the babies around all the time.
yeah,
And I think it is important. And I think, but it was also really hard, right? Because the Riveter had this message of changing work for women. And it's a very hard thing to say when at the same time, it was a really difficult venture backed, scaling rapidly company. It was really hard to work at. And so kind of
Yeah.
what I hoped my message was this is going to be really hard. It's almost impossible. And like you have flexibility, right? Like you didn't have to be at the office every day. You didn't have rigid hours. We tried to have meetings in core office hours, which did not always work, but we tried that. But I hoped that by bringing the babies, there was flexibility. I was modeling it, and and when I had my last baby, my executive team made me not come into the office for like a month. They're like, you have to not come in for a month. I could work, but they're like, you not like be there because that's a really bad way to model things. And they're right, right? They're
Yeah.
right. You have to model things.
Yeah. You mentioned nursing and breastfeeding too. That's like a whole other part of having a kid too. We didn't see that one coming. That's probably like
But
number
like
2 on the
nobody
list,
tells you about.
behind
I
sleep.
mean,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
and here's the thing
Total
too
game
about
changer. Yeah.
yeah, and here's the thing about nursing. If you are nursing, exclusively nursing your baby, you are nursing an average of 40 hours a week. That's a full-time
Yeah.
job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's wild.
Yeah.
Like, and nobody talks about it.
And anytime you do
So,
something like that for 40 hours a week, it's going to feel monotonous, and it's not going to feel special anymore too. And I know there's points where it's just such pain and almost like torture sometimes, but yeah, it's
I got really great at social media while I nursed. I'll admit it. I will like take on the guilt for every mother. Like I would sit on my phone doing social media a lot when I was nursing because it gets very repetitive. And it's not like you're not my mom, who I love and who is amazing, would be like, you need to be eye contact the whole time. And I'm like, can't. I just can't
yeah,
do it all the
yeah,
time. So
yeah. Sometimes the baby's not making eye contact, so
right. They were busy.
yeah,
So
yeah, they're busy. Yeah,
but I
yeah,
do
and you have
think
to
one
find
thing
time
to
to
note,
multitask. Yeah.
but one thing to note, like a tactical thing related to this, if you
Mhm.
are nursing or pumping, you need that space in your workplace and you need to ask for it if it's not provided to you.
Yeah.
You need a refrigerator to keep your milk in. You need a place to wash your pump parts. Ask. And if you don't feel comfortable asking your manager, ask your HR. But like that's your right, actually, to have that in your workplace, no matter where you work. And so ask.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. Okay. So we might have talked about this a little bit already, but what are some of the challenges you face as a working parent, and how have you overcome them?
I mean, there are a lot of challenges. I think a big
Yeah.
one that we really need to talk about way more in this country is cost. Childcare is so expensive. I have spent more on childcare. Um, and right now I don't own a home, but when we owned a home in Seattle, we spent more on childcare than we did on our mortgage. It's wild, right?
Yeah.
Childcare
Yeah.
expenses
I
are
mean,
just
this is like a half surprise face because I totally get that. I understand. I'm not as surprised having been in it for the last year or so. Yeah, it's very
yeah,
expensive.
yeah. I mean, it's just pretty crazy. And I have many children, which ups the cost of childcare. And now it's changing because my kids are going to two of my kids will be in public school next year. So I think the cost of childcare is just pretty out of control. And so it's
Yeah.
really hard to manage that and navigate that. Um, I've been really lucky because my mom has been able to help a lot. But it's a big deal, and we shouldn't discount that for people. I also think that one of the biggest challenges I had, no offense to lawyers, I did love being a lawyer most of the time, but I realized after I had my first daughter that if I was going to trade hours away from her, I wanted to be doing something I was really passionate about. And with lawyering, ultimately as a litigator, my job was to fight and I wanted to build. I wanted to do something that was like more positive in the world for me. No offense to
Yeah.
lawyers. And so I had to really reorient my entire career path to find something that made me feel like I was fulfilling that promise to myself of doing something I was passionate about and building something, putting something into the world rather than litigating. And if I hadn't had children, I don't think I would have had that realization and made that really big change. So that was a really big thing. I think the other thing is like that, we ignore too much is children are really hard on your relationship with your spouse and your relationship with your friends. Like it changes all the relationships around you because being a parent is a really hard job
Yeah.
and it takes a lot of time if you do it well. And so you have to really kind of work on those relationships, work on spending time on the relationships. work on, how you communicate. And I've had to learn with my husband that like the way he parents is different than the way I parent. And when he is parenting and I'm not around, like I'm out, right? Like it's, he's just going to do it the way he's going to do it. And he loves our kids and they're good and they're great. And it's got to be
Yeah.
okay. So,
Yeah.
yeah, which has also helped me as a manager, I will say, because like it's like, all right, like everyone's going to do things differently than I do it, and they're still going to get it done, and it'll be great, and I just have to kind of like let it ride. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
those are
Talk
some
about
of the many
prioritizing.
challenges. Yeah, some of the
Yeah.
many
You don't
challenges.
have, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, how do you feel about the mommy guilt
Oh,
situation that's
mommy
kind of
guilt.
placed on people in our society? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I
Not a
mentioned,
great term. Yeah.
not a great term, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, about kind of some of the things I felt I experienced that my husband didn't, and like mommy guilt, even in and of itself, and this is not a cut on you, Nick, but like it's a cut on the world, right? The concept of mommy guilt. Have you ever heard the phrase daddy guilt?
Nope.
Because I never
Yeah.
have, right?
Yeah.
And it's this thing that we place, this idea that we still carry in this country where mothers are supposed to be the primary caretakers. It's like you've heard me say many times parental leave. A lot of people still talk about maternity leave. But here's the
Hmm.
thing, if you say at the beginning it's maternity leave, then it becomes the mother's job at hour zero to be the primary parent. And that cannot be how it is. If that is how it is, women will never get to pay equity, women will never be promoted. There's a lot of people talk about the wage gap and everything and sexism, but I think there's this term we don't talk enough about called maternal bias. It's called the maternal wall. Like women are less likely to be promoted than men, but women with kids are less likely to be promoted than women without kids. Women tend to get a pay cut after they have a kid. Men, on the other hand, after they become fathers, tend to get a pay bump because they're seen as more responsible. And so, like, just this idea of like, I have tried to, I don't talk about mommy guilt and my own feelings about it. I personally have definitely felt bad being away from my kids because of me, right? Because of the way I feel, because I want to be with them and I want to make sure they're okay. But I grew up with a working mom. As I mentioned, she was a teacher and she was remarkable at it. She always talked about loving her job. And because she taught, my dad, and this is in the 80s in Ohio, in the Midwest, like my dad packed my lunches, did the laundry, coached sports teams, and he was a lawyer. And I was taken care of by a ton of other people. Like my great aunt she had an in-home daycare when I was little. I had cousins babysit me, other babysitters. And I knew that so many people loved me, which I think gave me a broader sense of safety than if it had just been my parents. And with my own kids, there are a lot of people that love them and take care of them. And they know those people love them. And so that's the benefit that they get with having two working parents. And so that's what I try to lean into rather than this idea of guilt.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just, I think that's great advice too. Like, making sure that they understand that a lot of other people love them, and that they are surrounded by a community that really, really cares for them. That's great advice. But coming back to the original question, yeah, there's no question that there's just all these stereotypes just baked into our society that we're kind of just exposed to, like, without even really realizing something's like, maybe it seems small, but the word you mentioned, the difference between maternity and paternity, like
Yeah.
the words that we choose matters, and setting that precedence from the beginning is can set off a shift in one way or the other,
Yeah.
for how you describe the policy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah, still lots of work to do on that front. Always trying to be aware of that, but I can't help sometimes fall into those stereotypes as well. With
I think everybody does.
yeah,
Everybody does. I mean, like I
yeah,
definitely do sometimes. I mean, like, yeah, it's just it's really it's hard, right? I mean, but I think like the more we acknowledge it and talk about it, the more we can change it.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, so what are some practices that you've put into place to manage the stress of balancing both full-time job and full-time parent times four on in your case?
I mean, I will say, like, and I think this is a very honest answer that, like, I mean, when you're a working parent of really young kids, it's just really hard. Like, it's just, you're just in it. Like, that's how I
Yeah.
think of it right now. And I'm sure there are parents joining us today or people who will watch this recording who are like, you have no idea. Why try being a working parent of teenagers, which I'm sure is actually very challenging in its own way as well.
Yeah.
But I think that, like, what I do is try to exercise. I think finding time to exercise is really like super important. And when your kids are little, you can take them in strollers for a walk. Like you don't have to like go to a HIIT class to exercise. You can just go for a half-hour walk and get outside and get some fresh air.
Yeah.
I also also like I sleep. Like I go to like I can barely drink like a drink anymore because like I just like I have to sleep to make this all work or
I
otherwise
hear
I'm
you.
useless. I have to be on top of my game. And so sleeping is really, really important. And there are nights like 2 nights ago, my 3-year-old had a stomach ache till midnight and I had to get up like 5 and it was a mess, right? But most nights I have really hard to sleep and prioritize sleep a lot.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is massive for my self-care is that I ask for help. I ask everybody for help. I
Mm,
mean, I'm not someone who used to ask for help a lot. And now I'm like, "Yeah, please raise my hand, wave the white flag." Like my family, we're relocating to Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up because I have a ton of family there to help us. And that's what we need right now. Right. And so
yeah.
I'm able to do that for work because of the way COVID has changed the world. But I think asking for help however you can and from whomever you can is really important. All of us, I hope, in the world have a friend that would watch your baby or babies for a couple of hours if you needed to just go. You don't have to like go do anything ambitious. If you needed to just sit at a coffee shop and take a break for a second, right? Like because we're human. And
Yeah.
sometimes when you have all these pressures of babies and work, like you don't feel human. And so giving yourself that grace is super important.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. I
and
can
one other
definitely
thing
break it
is,
down.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the one other thing I think, Nick, we were talking about this a while ago. I no longer try to be perfect. I realized pretty early on that I couldn't be a perfect parent and a perfect lawyer or a perfect CEO, and that I was just going to have to like do the best at both. And there were going to be parts of it that were very messy. Like
Mhm.
I'm in my bedroom right now, and if you saw the other half of my bedroom, there's like a huge pile of laundry that needs to be folded. And like I'm embarrassed by it myself, but it just is what it is. Like I haven't gotten to it and
I have a
I
pile of
will.
mail on my desk right here that I haven't gone
Yeah.
through. Snail mail. Yeah. So, of
The beauty of Zoom, we can
course.
just hide things, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
But I think that, and at work, I try to do a really good job. And then the other thing about, lacking perfection in both of these is becoming ruthlessly efficient with the time that you do have and prioritizing the hell out of the things really matter, that really matter for your work or that really matter for your kids. And I definitely do that. And then the final piece is if you are, so if you work with a team or if you have a parenting partner, um, you should all do what you're best at and leave the other to do what they're best at. My husband and I,
Yeah.
we have strengths and weaknesses. Like I can do the laundry and the dishes because they don't require a lot of detail. But my husband, like he does the other cleaning and like, cause he's really good at that. Right. And it's like, we just divide it up and
Hmm.
then like I do all the school and doctor and logistics stuff. And he does a lot of like the pickup and drop off, but we just divide what works. And I think it's really
Yeah.
important to do that. And I do that with my work team as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. We've had to divide our processes and create new processes in the house having a kid during COVID. And I tend to be the one who kind of executes on the processes after they're decided, and my wife kind of comes up with tackles a new process that's not really efficient. So we've kind of worked on that. Um, so I feel like I do want to touch on COVID for just a little bit because from my perspective, I feel like being home, everybody working from home has kind of leveled the playing field, and a lot of people in New York, where the Meetup office is located and where a lot of our employees are, they don't have a lot of extra rooms where they can just go and get away from everybody. So people from all aspects of the business will have their kids kind of jump in on the meeting, and it's just kind of become common place. And I feel like just kind of having that out in the open has been easier for me as a new parent, not being afraid to um, have to step away from my kid at one point, or have to put them on my lap for the second half of the meeting because
Totally.
mom needs a break, right? Or
Yeah.
my mother-in-law needs a break. So I hope we can kind of continue that. I hope that's kind of a new trend that starts where even when we're back in the office, we can all be more understanding of each other's schedules and not afraid to speak up or ask for help, like you mentioned
Well, like
as
at a
well.
certain point, we have to, right? Like the typical American workplace was built after World War II. And that was at a time when men went to work and women stayed home. there's one breadwinner and one caretaker. That is not how the world exists anymore. That is like,
No,
that is not our
we're
paradigm,
so
right?
far away from that. Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
so far away from that. Pre-pandemic, the workplace still tried to be that in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a
Yeah.
massive disconnect. And it's why,
Yeah.
we sit here and we wonder why there aren't more mothers in leadership, or, it's like, this is not complicated. Like, this is
Yeah.
not like, this workplace wasn't designed for this. And so we have this amazing opportunity right now as leaders, as employees, to force a redesigned workplace that allows us to break down those barriers in terms of, I've got kids, I'm caring for aging parents, which is a whole other thing, right? Like, that's a whole other thing. Or like, just I'm a human being and I need to go to the dentist, and so I'm gonna be gone for a while. Like, and
Yeah.
I think like all of those things are so important, and we really have this amazing opportunity to take advantage of this tectonic shift we've seen happen. And so I hope that we do. And I'm glad that for you, it's been probably like in a lot of ways, you've had a very isolated and hard transition into parenthood. I can't imagine. But at the same time, being able to show your baby and see other people's babies and dogs, whatever's happening at their houses, has to be a little bit nice.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had a small little family bubble that helped us with my wife's family. So that's been helping a lot. And I try to look at it positively. I've got to spend a lot of time on a daily basis, like watching my daughter grow up in the last 8 months and seeing those
Awesome.
milestones firsthand. It's been really special. So that's completely silver lining for the pandemic. So I think one last question before we move into the QA session for you, like, why should companies consider like all caretakers needs rather than only focusing on moms?
Well, I think for many of the reasons I talked about, it's important that we look at parenting as something that involves all genders and not just moms. And then at the same time, I did mention this, and this isn't the topic of today, but I think it's super important that like a lot of people and companies are also caretaking for their parents. And we also need to not
Yeah.
make that a woman's job. We need to also
Yeah.
make that like a load that can be borne by everybody. And so I think companies need to be very careful about the language that they use, about the policies that they implement, and about creating workplaces that really embrace parents. You're missing out on a ton of talent if you don't think about the needs of people who take care of other people. And so I think, there's just so many things we can do, and a lot of them don't cost money, right? Like, if you think about, I mentioned at the Riveter, we tried to have core working hours where we would schedule meetings between 10 and 3, so that if you had to do pickup or drop off or something, you weren't missing a meeting. It was not perfect. It did not always work. Do not implement policies because you cannot follow them 100% of the time of things like this.
Great
Just
advice. Yeah.
take a leap and try to do it.
Yeah.
But I think that like, things like that, they don't cost money. Or like allowing people to work from home a week, like that doesn't cost money. It's definitely worth trying. And so I really encourage companies to do that.
Great. Great. Okay. One more question too. So what can non-parents do to be better allies to parents in day-to-day life and in the workplace?
I mean, I think at a base level, and like I will say that I might be guilty of this. A lot of times, particularly mothers aren't invited onto projects because people assume they won't want to do it, especially if they have little babies at home. It's
Yeah.
something totally subconscious that we all have done. Don't do it, right? Like, give people the opportunity to say no if they want to, but don't assume somebody will want to lean out before you give them a chance to lean in. So I think that is super important. And again, doesn't cost anything, isn't hard. Just give people a chance to say no before you deciding what's good for them. I had that happen to me a lot as when I first had my first two kids, and it hurt beyond belief. It deprived me of corporate opportunities, and we shouldn't do it to people. So I think that that's really, really important. That's the best thing that you can do. And then otherwise, like, embrace the flexibility. And I also think, like, if you're a manager, when you're creating these flexible policies that are built for parents, just give them to everyone, right? Because like, it's like, you don't
Yeah.
know. We celebrate babies arriving because we see pregnancies or adoptions, and we have baby showers, and we have this idea of parental leave that some people get. But again, I'll go back to the other people are taking care of all sorts of other things, right? Like, you don't celebrate your parent going into a nursing home, or your parent going like, or someone getting sick, but like, these are things people have to deal with. And so providing flexibility for everyone benefits more people, and it benefits parents because then they don't feel singled out like a company is doing something special for them.
Yeah.
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 And so I think
Yeah.
that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. Yeah. Being able to like advocate for kind of mental health in general, because I think part of being a parent is mental health like is involved heavily in being a parent. And
Yeah.
yeah, if you have a mom on your team and she just needs a mental health day to not be a mom for a little while or deal with the a mom 24/7. Yeah, don't assume that she's not interested in the project or doesn't want to commit, work on the team or be a big part of the team. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we need to do away with those biases as much as we possibly can, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then one last thing that
Yeah.
I think companies should
Yeah.
do. A lot of what I've talked about applies to people who are in salaried corporate positions for companies that offer benefits. For companies that are newer, don't offer those benefits for people who work in hourly positions, and the people that run the companies that employ people in hourly positions. One thing that I think is really important is putting together resource lists of options for childcare, community care, all of these different things. I mentioned when I first had my first daughter, we had a nanny share. So we shared the cost of childcare with another family, which brought our childcare
Hmm.
costs down
Yeah.
significantly. There
Great.
are all sorts of in-home daycares. There are all sorts of state stipends, federal stipends to help people pay for the cost of childcare. And so really providing those resources to people is incredibly, incredibly important. Um, and then be a company that advocates for more federal resources and state resources for childcare, because this is like the most trite statement in the world, but children really are our future. And so making sure you have healthy children and parents who feel that they can provide a healthy environment for their kids is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. Um, all right. So some questions are rolling in here. So we kind of just answered this, but John Goldberg was asking, do you have tips for parents who make minimum wage and don't have enough money for childcare other basic needs?
I mean, that's incredibly hard. And so I think the thing, and
Yeah.
John, thanks for asking that question. I hope I just touched on it a little bit with we finding the resources collectively in the community, where we can find collective care is really important. In having companies provide those lists and everything. And I will also say, I'm going to back this up, like we should all have a living wage so we can pay for these things. Yeah, it's like a whole other
Yeah.
conversation and could be a
Yeah.
topic for another day, but it's important that we don't in this country. So, and then finding, I mentioned the concept of a nanny share, but there's also swaps. And so, if you have somewhat of a flexible schedule, people will swap childcare. I've had friends who've done that where, one person will watch the kids while another one works and then they'll swap, which is,
Yeah.
it's a path. It's not good enough and it's not the right answer, but it's
Yeah.
a something.
Yeah. Kind of developing your support network at the same time.
Yep.
With that one. Awesome. Another question, how can you avoid inequality in relationships due to scheduling conflicts?
Um, so the way that I would answer this is that, like, I mentioned before, so if you're talking about if you have a parenting partner, a marriage, or a partner, like I mentioned this before with me and my husband, sometimes he's the primary caretaker, sometimes I am, and like it's really hard, and like the other person's angry that they're not getting as much time, and we just try to go back and forth and make it as fluid as possible and be open and communicate about it, but it is like it's an ongoing thing, right? Like it's just really hard. And
Yeah.
in work, I think, I've thought about this a lot. I always didn't want to seem like I wasn't pulling my weight. I had little kids when I was a lawyer, and so I would always try to over communicate when I wasn't in the office and I was taking advantage of full time. Like I'm getting this done, like and just staying on top of it. And the proof is in the pudding, I guess. But I didn't want to seem like I was taking advantage of a workplace situation. But that's a really complicated question and a good one.
Yeah. 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 All right. So Amanda asks, what self-care advice do you have for single parents of a special needs child with very little external assistance?
That sounds really hard, Amanda.
Yeah, that sounds extremely hard.
Yeah, and so I guess the advice that I would give in terms of, you say you have very little external assistance, and it goes back to the question or to the comment I made earlier about asking everybody for help. I think a lot of times we think we're more alone in the world than we are. And to ask your friends, even if you have a friend you could ask once a month, if you have two of those friends that you could ask once a month, and if they're able to spend time with your special needs child, I would really recommend doing that, even if it's just for an hour. The other thing is, I would, when I had my, this is different for me. I do not have a special needs child right now, and I'm not a single parent at all. And so I don't know what that's like. But I will say, when I had two little kids under two in Seattle, at the time my husband traveled a lot, and then we didn't have external support that we were paying for when I was on parental leave. And so I would like find little things I could do. Like I would like sit and have a coffee with like in the background for 30 minutes. And like that sounds like it's not self-care, but I did it before my kids got up, and it was just like it let me breathe a little bit. So I just stopped. My house was a mess, the laundry wasn't done, but it was like, this is what I'm doing. And it's not going and getting a massage, which I really hate that that's our idea of self-care in this country, but that was self-care. And so finding moments that you can try to take care of yourself and listen to yourself and let things not be finished and perfect is something we can do for ourselves too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's take another question. Do you have any advice to someone making a career change who is also retraining or going back to school and being a parent at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, that's like, so I had a career change after I had two kids. And so,
Yeah,
um, I think when you're making a career change and you have kids, it's a perfect opportunity to try to define your life more as the way you want to build it and work with people who will embrace you as a parent. So really, I would be really clear with people. I think we're really all afraid to be clear with people, and we think we're going to get fired or not get a job or not, but if you're good at what you do, like you will still get a job. You will still, like I think about this a lot when I started my company, and this is not completely relevant, but it's a little bit on point. When I started the Riveter, I didn't know that women received only 2% of venture capital dollars, and that's white women, not women of color, who receive basically zero. But I didn't know that women received only 2% of venture capital dollars. And I wonder if I would have even tried if I knew that stat, or if I would have been like, well, that's impossible. And I think
yeah,
like I put that in a lot of my life now. I'm like, well, people will tell me this won't work, but I'm just going to do it. And you'll be surprised at the way the world will bend around you. Um, but I think, and going back to school and having kids, it's trying to find a school that will allow you to have flexible classes to meet your schedule, and then finding times to study where you can just fit it in.
yeah, yeah. I think being focused has helped too. Changing careers, because I made a job change recently, and it took a lot of focus and determination.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so in the same vein, do you have any advice for parents who chose to take longer leaves and how they could address the gaps in their career or gaps in their resume?
Yeah.
Is there-
So I'm going to back up a second, because there's all these stats that say like it's impossible to get back into the workplace if you leave. I don't I I don't know if I believe them. I know like I don't know if I believe them. There are all the circumstances around them. I know a ton of women who took significant leaves and then were able to get back into the workforce. You definitely lose money because you lost the salary of the years that you weren't working, and then like the increases you would have gotten then. But I would lean into your past experience, and I would, in the years that you do not have a salaried job or hourly payment, I would try to maintain engagement in your community through workforce and include that in your resume, and then just keep up to date on changing technology. Sorry, I said technology like it was two words. Changing technology, so that you're able to jump back into the workforce when you want to. And then I would try to reach out to a recruiter or really start working your network. Sample size of one, but when my sister had her second child, they moved across the country and she took 2 or 3 years off. And she was able to get a great job when she wanted to go back. And then parlay that into another position a couple years later. But I think maintaining your network too while you're not working is really important, whether that's through coffees or just emailing people, just checking in, letting people know you're still there, is a great idea.
Yeah, yeah, great idea. Um, any tips for getting when you get distracted working from home? There's constant distractions in this person's household, and I I totally relate to that. And it can quickly eat away at your day, is what they're saying, and affect productivity.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
I
a
would love
big
to hear your thoughts on
believer,
that too.
big believer in co-working spaces. So I think that, you should try to get your company to pay for a co-working membership, maybe even a flex one if you're not going to go every day, but just the opportunity to get out of your house to work somewhere else when you need to or want to or can is really important.
Yep, yep.
Um, I mean, like, listen, I have spent the past year and a half working on a bathroom floor and it's in my bedroom. I mean, we are all like, this is kind of horrible, right? Like we have all just like shoved ourselves into every corner of our house to find a way to work.
Hmm.
And so I think it's like, I'm living in a condo right now and I have to go to the building's business center every morning to work because otherwise my kids are just like on me, right? And it's basically impossible. But I think if you can, if you're working at home, finding a place with a door, and I've worked in the closet, like, it's probably the most important thing so that you can, try to separate yourself. But also just like, if you can take walking meetings like on your phone to get outside, I think it's really important. None of us do it
Yeah,
enough. But that's a small tangible thing we can do.
yeah, that's kind of a twofer there. Get a little exercise at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, I think the last question that we have time for. Do you know of organizations which have outlined policies specifically benefiting single moms?
I actually don't. And that's a blind spot that I have. There's not enough out there for single moms. And you have inspired me to start looking for an organization because I think, like, almost half of American parents, or slightly over half, are single parents. So this is not an outlier issue.
No.
The one that is really, really important.
Yeah, yeah. Incredible respect for single parents having just gone through it for the last 8 months.
Yeah,
It's not easy. I don't know how you can do it as a single parent. Yeah,
agreed.
but
Yeah.
yeah, anything we can do to help single parents, they absolutely deserve it. Great. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Amy,
Thank you.
so much for taking your time and sharing your insights with us. So before we go, I'd like to share two slides. You can find other parents to connect to on Meetup and save 30% on your first subscription if you go to meetupsavings.com. Also, we recently launched our podcast, Keep Connected, with Meetup CEO earlier this year. Please take a moment to take out your phone and scan the QR code to give it a listen. As a reminder, you can view a recap of this event in a few days on our Community Matters blog at meetup.com/blog. So thanks again for joining us and stay safe, everyone. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.